You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Hello, welcome to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Its purpose is to dissect horror films, both old and new. I'm your host, Saul Muerte, and we are rounding out what has been our series or a short kind of entry into our season that is into looking at the late, great Stuart Gordon's work and all the Lovecraftian kind of themes that have come along the way. And I've really enjoyed the ride, I have to admit. It's been really good kind of going back and seeing these movies again. And I think we kind of did touch on the fact that it arguably nobody has quite been able to produce Lovecraft. I mean, there's been elements of it. I mean, we've talked about The Thing, for example, has moments of or salute to Lovecraft within it, and there's been kind of copycat kind of or directors and films that have been inspired by his works. But if we're looking at the as close to or faithfully kind of to the films or the books, that Lovecraft had put pen to paper on, Stuart Gordon arguably has come the closest. So that's why I think it's been quite kind of cool looking back at these films. As I said, we rounded out the four that we've done. We looked at Re-Animator, we've looked at From Beyond, we looked at Dolls as well, which obviously wasn't necessarily Lovecraft. But we are returning to Lovecraft again in what was a 2001 movie, I want to say off the top of my head. I may get the date wrong for that, which actually was a Spanish produced film that Stuart Gordon did, and it was called Dagon, which actually may confuse some that may be kind of fans of Lovecraft, because it's not actually based on the novella Dagon, which was in his works. It's actually was based on another one, which was called Shadow over Innsmouth. So there's some people, like myself included, when I was kind of delving into this, naturally presumed it was based on Dagon, until I was kind of doing a bit of reading around it. I want to look, I'm not as affiliated with the Lovecraft kind of novels. I've read some of his stuff. I did tackle a little bit into the beginning of this one, but didn't quite get around to kind of ducking my head in and reading the thing in its entirety, which brings me to why I need to introduce you to my offsider and guest podcaster for this podcast, and that is none other than Oscar Jack, Mr. Lovecraft himself, to join in and fill in the gaps. So welcome aboard, Oscar. Good to have you aboard.
It's good to be back from the depths of the ocean. We've come.
It's look. So I have kind of mentioned that you joined us before on the From Beyond stuff, which I absolutely adored going back into that movie, and we mentioned all about that in a previous podcast a couple of eps back. But we did mention in that how you are a big fan of the written works of Lovecraft and have been for many a while. And I am kind of leaning, as I said, on you a little bit on the novel itself, that this was loosely based on The Shadow of Innsmouth, and he was very good at Lovecraft. Is very good at doing that kind of narrative kind of text that he does, from talking about basically reciting or recounting these events that he's heard. It's essentially the style of his work. And this is all too familiar with that for those that are across the way he writes as well. But the movie does take a different tack and different approach into that, because it needs to tell it from a point of view from a much broader perspective. So we're coming. Yes, there's one singular character in Paul Marsh, and we'll get to him in a moment. And he is our journeyman as we go through. But there are other components that kind of lead into it. So it's not just like one person's journey into this world as all this stuff kind of unfolds. So from your point of view, before we kind of start dissecting and discussing the film, though, Oscar, like how close is the text to the film?
Well, it's funny that it is it was a Spanish production. It was made in Spain. A lot of the non-speaking Innsmouthians, or as they're called, the town in this one is called Imboca, which is the Spanish. Yeah, which is the Spanish adaptation of Innsmouth. In terms of like a adaptation, it almost feels like when like the Italians take a story and kind of make it their own. You
Yes.
know, like Zombie 2, where you kind of look at it and you're like, yeah, that is it. But it just kind of has these weird kind of fundamental changes. Whereas in like with The Shadow of Innsmouth, like that novella is just boiled down to a singular narrator.
Yeah.
Who doesn't have this kind of group of people. He kind of comes in and he's just kind of a traveler, kind of coming into this town of Innsmouth, and how there is a lot more kind of there's a lot more lore, obviously, in the book, as he can kind of explain a lot of what he's told.
Yeah.
But there's there's a lot more lore in the book. There's a lot more active conspiracy. It's a lot more placed in the real world, whereas for Dagon, it feels almost like Odysseus landing on like the island of like witches. It's a lot more kind of mystical. It doesn't feel kind of planted in the real world.
Yes.
And in the book, they have there is one more kind of human character who just kind of works at like a little store. But they have the kind of the old drunkard. You know, they've got a lot of the kind of the same parallels.
Sure. Yeah.
It's just kind of a little bit more plugged into the real world, or more so into his kind of mythos, not just taking Dagon, who, as you mentioned, there was the original short story of it, which kind of first had the deep ones, potentially Dagon itself kind of coming out of the ocean as this lost World War II soldier in the ocean, kind of finds this mysterious landmass. And that was quite early in his writing career. So this is definitely kind of the evolution of that.
Yeah, sure.
And it is an interesting choice, the title switch.
Yeah.
Because you know, he stuck with the titles for the first two, from Beyond and Re-Animator, and I think Shadow over Innsmouth is a fantastic title.
It's an awesome title. Yeah.
I think Dagon's a bit of I just kind of didn't get it.
Yeah, I hear you.
It's because it's not like Dagon is like, you know, the pop culture icon of, you know, of Lovecraft. It's like Cthulhu has that altar well and firm.
From my end, like, because as I said, I did kind of read a little bit of the beginning of this of the Shadow over Innsmouth, and like it does mention how Dagon is a religion in and of itself. Within that
fish god,
exactly. So maybe it's just maybe it was just kind of literally just playing with that broad terminology that, you know, this is what we're playing with, and especially if, like, you know, kind of a bit of spoilers, this is what they're trying to position Paul Marsh as, like the next prince or king within that world, to carry on in its you know, to carry on the legacy of the people of Innsmouth, as we kind of uncover that. So I don't know. Well, that's how I was looking at it. Like, obviously, I've come at it from the other way round. So I've watched the movie and I've been reading the text. So and so I was just trying to piece those pieces together based on what I watched. So yeah, interesting. So all right. So, and like Dagon itself, the film that we're about to discuss, is a movie that's quite fresh for me. Like I think it was only a few years back that I watched it for the first time. So for me, it was one of the ones that I kind of came late into, even though, like I said, it was an early 2000s film. I didn't really kind of catch it until a couple of years back. But and I always ask this, as you know, Oscar, but where did you first watch this film, and do you kind of remember your reaction to it at the time?
I mean, this one is super fresh for me. As they all kind of came to me in quick succession. Of seeing Re-Animator on the big screen, then getting From Beyond, and then seeing what was next, and it was Dagon, and I ordered it, and it came, and I chucked it on with my housemates, who we'd all just watched From Beyond.
Yeah,
and
nice.
It's like, and I mean, there's a big gap between those two.
There is.
Well, because with, you know, I mean, that's quite a big jump between his Lovecraft movies because what he had Dolls, and then I always find really hilarious that he worked on the script for Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
I know, man. Yeah. That's
very,
right.
very kind of bizarre, and, as well as the this is like so many more years later that he's kind of coming back to this. Well, you know, he has he did the 90s Body Snatchers. He wrote it.
That's right. Yeah.
It kind of really really got thrown more so into the. I wouldn't say any of these movies are particularly mainstream, but a bit more Hollywood.
Yeah, that's right. And there was a few kind of like, it kind of, for me, went more sci-fi world, like into that kind of, I mean, like you look at Fortress, for example.
Fortress,
the Lambert one, right? And Space Truckers obviously came not long after that. So he kind of was deviating more to that. And I guess that when you then watch Dagon in connection with the journey that he took, it does lend itself more into the fantasy world, which you were kind of implying earlier, rather than more that kind of more concrete, grounded stuff that even as far-fetched as Lovecraft can be. But like it felt like with Re-Animator and From Beyond, it felt within our world that these events were occurring, whereas it feels like as soon as Paul Marsh steps off the boat and onto shore, we are already into this very kind of different world, different environment as the story unfolds, and very much in that, as I said, that fantasy kind of component as stuff starts. Interesting enough, seeping, or you know, it's like the water itself is seeping through into the land that's there, and or as he slowly kind of uncovers more cracks and crevices, more of this world kind of comes up to the surface as he uncovers it. So it's an interesting ride, and really interesting to at the end of it kind of talk about that, I guess, and just work out our reaction to this movie in comparison, like, because there's those 3 Lovecraft films that we said, where does this one sit? You know, I think I've already hinted at that, but I think we should round that out.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, all right. So very much kind of that was where you came from, very fresh, watching kind of all those kind of almost in succession around the same time. And so we're about to kind of, let's just kind of duck into this and start dissecting this and looking at the film itself. And those that aren't familiar with our podcast, we kind of delve into the narrative and weave our way through it and we kind of sometimes go off on massive tangents, but I try and claw us back if I can, as we go along the way. So when we open up the film, we're introduced, there's basically 2 different couples that are on like a boat, kind of pretty much in the middle of nowhere. But we know that it's slightly off the shores of, I think, Italy at the time that they're going through. We meet Paul Marsh, who's our protagonist, and he is somebody that is heads constantly in the stock market. So he's got like the computer laptop with him, and he's watching or following the stock market as it's going, and that's his world. That's where he's embedded. He lives in that environment. And there's a point where his girlfriend Barbara, they're coming to get you, Barbara, is actually pissed off with him. You know, she's trying to kind of throw herself at him and not getting anywhere because his head's to kind of focus on the numbers. So she actually picks up the laptop and throws it into the sea. And this is kind of in that short kind of sequence, we kind of already get a lot to know about this guy. He is, no pun intended, or maybe there is, a fish out of water, and he has been kind of encapsulated into this kind of very cyber world, looking at facts and figures and not looking at the world around him. And the moment he does, obviously, that's when everything comes on loose. Yeah, you look like you were going to say something, buddy. What were you going to?
Well, yeah, no, and we open with the credits with very 2001 kind of ripple credits, as we kind of swim through underwater, and I really quite like the opening dream as he's kind of swimming down deeper and deeper into this kind of these deep one carved remnants of an ancient civilization, and we see this kind of beautiful mermaid. With really good mermaid effects. Like the tail looks great.
Yeah. I have to admit, some of the effects were pretty. For I mean, some of it.
Some of them.
Yeah. I was surprised when they worked. I guess.
Yes. Well, and I am 100% on board with that. It's surprising because it does, like, he is very much using like the effects of the time with what he's got, and that's you know no kind of and that was just the way of the industry, like that. I don't think is particularly on Stuart Gordon, who has
that's right,
up until now, like, he's really started, like, particularly with all the sci-fi stuff, like that's he's been kind of using all the tools that he can. But he kind of wakes up, and the merman has these razor sharp teeth. There's a bit of a jump scare as we wake up, and Paul's on the boat, and we meet the owners of the boat, Howard and Vicky. And it's a little bit. I feel like each time I watch it, I'm always just kind of like, who are these people? What's everyone's relationship? They seem to be in business together. Maybe. Or just friends, because Paul's relationship with them doesn't seem as strong as Barbara's, but they've got this weird paternal, like, older friends couple.
The age gap is very different. So, like, when you look at them, you go, well, how what's the history behind these guys? How did they get together?
Yes, and I feel like that
on a boat
kind of
together, and something that's quite.
Why are they doing? At a time that it seems that their company is kind of like, it seems like he does need to be keeping an eye on it. It seems like they are a part of like a new startup that is doing incredibly well, and that this has kind of rocketed them to financial success.
That's right.
As it's something that he tries to use as a means of getting out later on, but no good. As you kind of see the storm coming off to the distance, and and also the sound of kind of chanting coming from this little Spanish town that they're no, it's Spanish.
It is Spanish, I think it's India that maybe they've left Italy. I think that was where and so they're then coming along, the coast, and they're now across the shores of Spain. So it's that kind of area. But and interestingly, the chanting's interesting because that is in the text. I remember that, from the novel. Or the novella, I should say, where he does talk about the weird chanting of the townsfolk of Innsmouth. So I kind of, when I was reading that, I was like, oh yeah, that's kind of good that they kept that kind of theme running through for the film. And so this is where things go a little bit sour quite quickly. Like the storm hits pretty thick and fast. They end up crashing against some rocks, essentially just off the coast of where Innsmouth is, and because they're kind of stranded, they've got no option.
With Vicky with her leg
caught
down below, caught as the water kind of rises.
Yeah, that's it. So so basically Howard opts to stay with Vicky while a reluctant Paul joins Barbara to go and get help. This is where so they go off in a raft of some kind that they kind of get off onto to get to shore. She's losing a lot of blood, so I should have said that with Vicky. So it's actually quite a severe wound that she's got with her leg pinned under. So it's actually a dire need that they get medical help for her. So they get to shore, where they're greeted by a bit of a gruff kind of fisherman character. And Barbara is fluent in the language, and so she is talking to him. and he's relaying the conversation back, and he basically says like, that you can get the only way to get help or a phone call is at the hotel. There's a telephone there where you can get help. But they're like, well, we need to get them now, and so this is where Barbara and Paul have to separate and split up, because Barbara knows the language, so she can go up to the hotel, which kind of leaves Paul with these other two fishermen with like a bit of a kind of crappy trawler, kind of say that they will kind of take him back to try and assist with the stranded couple on the boat.
And while all of this is transpiring, we kind of cut back to Howard comforting Vicky as the water rises and the bloodied water. As something kind of stirs, we get a maybe for the time an okay kind of blood effect of it kind of trailing off in the water, looking like a ribbon. As something is there with them. She kind of she feels it rush up against her, as we kind of like we get our next little kind of jump scary, so that when Paul arrives, they're both gone.
They're gone.
He is very much stripped of everyone very quickly.
And it's interesting that it cuts to that really quick, though, doesn't it? Like, I mean, this whole thing kind of happens really quite swiftly. That he's now he's pretty much on his own, without any kind of knowledge of, or he can't speak the language, doesn't know. He's got these two kind of strange fishermen that he's kind of stuck with, and he's like, well, I've got no option. Like, I don't know what's happened to them. He just presumes they've been killed, or like, because the boat is sinking essentially. So so he goes back ashore, and knows that he has to try and make his way up to the hotel, because that's where Barbara has gone to get help. And when he gets there, there's like this kind of really weird, like, pale man kind of at the counter register there, and Paul's trying to kind of doing the layman
in a very 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 American 2001. It's louder and slightly slower.
Just as loud as you can.
They definitely play on the like the American tourist
very much
kind of vibe, as we'd learned that the priest who had previously greeted them does speak some English.
Yes, he does.
And tells we get these little touches where we we see that the priest has webbed hands, and when the desk clerk kind of turns his head, we can see he has gills on the side. Which I feel like the conversation is, how much do you tiptoe around it? Because I feel like it tips the hand a bit too much. But kind of most people kind of coming into it with you and it all goes to kind of shit quite quickly. Whereas like the strangeness in the story and the mystery, and that kind of it pulls it out a little bit, but that's just not the kind of movie that we're in.
No, that's right. I know where you're going with that too, because as I said, like from what I did read, it does talk it more with the gills thing. It doesn't mention its gills. It just said these weird kind of creases in their neck that make them look older than they would appear. It's like a 30-year-old man suddenly looks a little bit older because he's got these creases in their neck. So it doesn't really, it's all implied that there's something about these people that don't quite look how they should.
They're bug-eyed. They're kind of slimy skins. They've all got the web hands. But the priest tells Paul that Barbara's gone. She'll be gone for an hour. She's gone to get the police she's away. So he's completely alone in the crappiest hotel you've ever seen in your life.
And what's more, that there's no phone either, even though the priest said there was a phone. So it's like contradiction. Yeah.
Yes. And it's like there is definitely the kind of camp comedy elements, particularly in the first half. I think particularly when it's kind of Paul doing kind of a bit of a nebbish or like Woody Allen-esque kind of thing of him just kind of wandering around saying a lot of things to himself. He's quite bumbly. Though there is a really great moment of I dare say action as he kind of heads up to the room and sees how crappy it is. Kind of looks out the window and just sees the shambling townsfolk. And I mean, like, it's all out the window now. Like, they're all kind of like looking up and reaching and speaking in their kind of speaking in Spanish and in their different tongues, and they all kind of start kind of rushing up to, I guess, grab him. Like, it's not particularly subtle, but
that's right.
A nice moment where he goes over to the door and it doesn't have a lock, but the bathroom has a lock.
I know. That's like
he unscrews that lock and starts screwing it onto the other one. It's just this moment where I'm like, I that's very specific, and I like that. I like that little detail.
It's a bit madcap, isn't it? Like, they say, because he goes up into this hotel room and it's a shithole of a hotel room, and you're right, there's no lock on his door. And at that moment, to me, it felt almost like Peter Jackson's early films. That's that kind of weird, kind of quirky humor thing that was thrown into the mix. You could very much see something like that in Brain Dead, for example, in that kind of really kind of obscure and like you said, specific moment. And so he's trying to madly kind of re-screw these the bolt back onto the front door, but obviously not the front door, the door to his bed, to his room, and he fails to do that, and then he ends up going through and into the bathroom and trying to barricade himself in there. As all these kind of locals are trying to descend upon him. He manages to escape through the bathroom window, but in doing so,
you say escape. It's not as fortunate. He falls.
He basically
smashes through like an atrium glass ceiling. Taking quite a beating as he kind of gets up and starts hobbling away, which is a trait that he now shares with the rest of Innsmouth.
Yes.
It's called Imboka. We're just going to be calling it Innsmouth. It's Innsmouth.
Yeah, we are.
And I meant, from this moment, it becomes them just kind of chasing. Like, there is so little dialogue in the next, and it goes on for quite. I feel like it goes on for this chunk of the movie, where he has he's kind of like he's running around town, he's hiding in various places. They keep on kind of seeing them. They're kind of bumbly as well, because they can't run at full pelt. They're all just kind of, but there's a lot of them, and they're all coming in out of the rain and with their big kind of gooey bug eyes, and
but there's along the way, there's pockets where like he sees them kind of tanning human skin and things like that as well. Like,
and we see a car as well. We see the car of what we don't know who yet, but definitely someone rich. It has a strong vibe of the Simpson episode with the leader, the very nice automobile.
The leader. So he kind of like you said, he's limping around. He tries to escape through various pockets along the way. He hides at one point. He hides behind one of those stretched human skins as the people kind of limp past him or shuffle past him. he then kind of again the next sequence is him trying to fight off some of the villagers who kind of find him by like lighting some of the skins on fire, and then he escapes by pretending to be a villager, kind of like, you know, very like Shaun of the Dead kind of moment where let's pretend to be a zombie, but in this case pretend to be a villager, as he carries out one of their like these leather things. And then he ducks down into an alleyway, which is where he's then confronted by this drunk old man with a thick accent. He basically then explains to Paul
Ezekiel,
yeah. And he basically explains that he's the last human in Boca or Innsmouth. And he talks about the rise of Dagon. And then we get is this our only flashback? I think it's our only flashback sequence.
Yes. I love this scene. Like I kind of wish that this is what the movie was.
It was about,
as we kind of like flash back to him as a little young boy.
Yeah.
And the rest of the movie is all filmed handheld.
Yes.
It's all kind of very kind of shaky, relatively wide most of the time. But this scene we kind of get, you know, a bit of a crane shot. It becomes a lot more kind of classically cinematic as we see him as the fish kind of and this is very much kind of taken straight from the novella, where there is this kind of one of the very few humans in Innsmouth is this kind of drunkard who is able to kind of, you know, tell our narrator and flesh in all of the lore. As you know, he tells us the story of how the village, you know, all of the fish kind of dried up, and it was a cultist who came to the town, kind of with the promise of kind of saving the village if they kind of worship Dagon, this fish, the Order of Dagon.
Yes, Dagon,
this kind of this fish god that demands blood sacrifice.
Yes.
And of course they do, because you don't just refuse those kinds of things.
Yes.
As they kind of throw out their the old religious ideas and replace all of their iconography with the eye of Dagon and these images that Paul has seen in his dream from the opening.
Yes.
That he's seen these images in this ancient kind of well, and they start finding not only fish but gold when they start pulling in the fish.
Yeah, that's right.
Bringing kind of massive wealth and prosperity.
Yeah.
And then that's kind of where it kind of comes back and holds off from the rest of the lore that we kind of get out from the rest of the rest of the film.
Yeah. So that's right. And so there's so you're right. There's lots of, and that's talked. I remember that was in like you're right in the novella tool in the novella as well, where I think somebody's telling the story to him about the fact that Innsmouth is renowned for its wealth, but nobody knows where this money comes from. So it's kind of hinting at that. Well, it goes into a bit more explanation of that in this section. And at what point so they kind of are reached with these kind of rewards, and they, like you said, they turn the temple into temple to Dagon,
and they just have to breed with the deep ones.
That's right.
All of these half fish, half humans running around all over the place.
And so everyone kind of does that except the old man and his parents, and the stranger. Anyone that refuses to do so were killed as well. That was the other thing. Sorry. And so the boy who is the old man that's telling the story, he was too frightened to kind of speak, and so the temple head tore off the boy's cross necklace and blessed him in the name of Dagon before continuing the service. So like he's been kind of inordained within the group against his will. We have this point where at one point the fish just stopped coming, and as did the gold, and that's when the people asked Dagon what, what's forsaken them, were they not praying enough? And this is where he said no, he wants sacrifices. Women were to be given to Dagon, not to be killed, to be mated with, as you said, and to populate the children with their own kind. And this breeding process then kind of occurred. And and he mentions, the old man mentions that he remained human, and they didn't touch him, and the reason was because they consider him drunk and not a threat to their own kind, and that's what the only reason.
He's like a pet.
Yeah. And so then this is where Paul then starts realizing that maybe something may have happened to Barbara in the mix of all this, and he tries to explain or begs to the old man, like, to take them where they are. And the old man at first is like, no, I'm not going to do that. But then Paul then manages to kind of persuade him a little bit, and we see this car go past again that we mentioned, and he manages to kind of sneak into it. But this is where he's captured in doing so.
I'll slam the brakes on there, because we have our whole scene of him sneaking around the house as he and Ezekiel kind of sneak up towards the car.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Which is why it feels, because we basically have a whole scene, like quite a long sequence of kind of what we've had of him just sneaking around and kind of being chased and almost being caught, but he kind of ends up in one of the higher rooms where this beautiful young woman is lying in bed, who is the woman from his dreams, who he's seen twice now.
Yeah,
he saw her once in the opening dream underwater, and once in his room, in his awful hotel room.
Yes.
So the third time that he sees her and sees that she's real, and he's just absolutely drawn to her, and she's she is such a good casting in this actress who is just so kind of like transfixing. She's got these like big eyes, like big natural eyes. As he kind of goes in and is drawn in for a kiss, and realizes that she does not have legs. Well, she has more than two legs.
Yes.
She has this octopus kind of bottom half mermaid kind of situation.
Yes.
It's a nice inversion, because in the beginning we get our kind of traditional mermaid, and then in this scene we kind of get the revelation that it's not as nice. Like, many tentacles aren't as nice as a fishtail. Even like this kind of this mixing of kind of what mainstream society have kind of been like, yes, the pretty mermaid, whereas this is way more Lovecraftian. It's just like it's tentacles. It's kind of freaky as someone comes to kind of check on her, and Paul hides behind the door, and she doesn't rat him out.
No.
Which is another really interesting element, where you like what this relationship is.
Yes.
Like it definitely starts bringing up way more of those questions. But then he's able to kind of sneak down and hop into the car and hijack it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And that's where I completely missed that, and I'm glad you brought that back in too, because it is actually a really significant moment. So he sneaks into the car, but then he ends up being kind of basically kind of captured in the mix of his attempts to escape. And at which point he's rounded up, and he kind of ends up in this like old barn. And this is where he then is reunited again with Vicky and Barbara. So Vicky is alive. And Barbara's fine, but Vicky is definitely very kind of withdrawn.
Yes. Missing a leg.
Missing a leg. Yeah.
Missing a leg. Just kind of, it's all sewn up. I feel like this is where I'm a little bit on cruise control for the movie, and then it's this point that I really start like, it really kind of wakes me up. I definitely missed the other performers.
you kind of false sense of security, you kind of succumb to it a little bit. I guess because a lot of that, as you said, the earlier stuff is him just kind of meandering around. He kind of keeps stumbling upon different places, and this is the point where I guess things sit for a bit, only to kind of reveal some of the horrors that's unfolding for the people that are there. This is where, as we said, that we see Paul is kind of wondering what's going on with Vicky and what's happened to her, and she keeps babbling and not being very clear, and kind of saying something about this weird creature that attacked her in the boat and killing Howard, and then doing something to her. And and Paul is a bit kind of like not understanding what's going on or what she's implying, and the old man basically says like, well, he took her, and Paul's still not getting it, and he's like, he fucked her, the old man.
In the biblical sense.
And Paul then kind of starts to it dawned on him again, like the seriousness of the situation they're in. And so Paul then tries to free her. He cuts her loose with a pocket knife that he so happens to have. And he just does so just at the point where the captors arrive. And this is where Vicky then steals Paul's knife, and she then holds it to her own stomach, shouting that she's going to kill herself. The captors are trying to talk her out of it, because she's bearing Dagon's child. But Vicky isn't having a bar of it, and she basically kind of kills herself with the knife in quite a brutal way. So we knew that she was at the brink. So she's gone through this massive ordeal, which we don't see. This is all kind of just told after the fact. But it's suitably shaken her up so much that she can't bear the thought of continuing. Paul and the old man managed to kind of kill one of the guards and knock out one of the other ones, but they end up getting just recaptured again by the guards. And it was a kind of a crap attempt at trying to get away, essentially. So then Paul and the old man are then taken back into the barn, and this is where they're chained. And they meet this kind of guy who is sharpening kind of like knives. And he tells them that it'll be an honor for them to die and be used as ritual masks. But they're given one last chance to repent and join and become part of the cult of Dagon, essentially. At which point the old man just spits in this guy's face, and he starts to say the Lord's Prayer. And Paul also refuses. And they basically then skin the old man alive, and pray, who is still praying while they are skinning him, and bleeds to death. And excuse me, this is when Paul then realizes he's the next one up, and then someone comes up and tells the Skinner not to kill him, but to instead take him to the house. And this pisses off the Skinner dude, but he's obviously has to comply with whoever it is that has called Paul away. So then Paul is then basically taken away back into the house again, of which he tries to escape. And he runs down the hallway, and the first door he kind of comes into, and that's where he then, that's where he meets the mermaid from his dreams. Or am I getting confused? Didn't this bit happen?
No, this is the second time. So this is the second time that she has saved his life.
Yes.
They've got plans for him. He's important.
Yeah.
Which you really get every time that those two are in a scene together, him and the mermaid. She just has these like, it's not just that her eyes are big, it's that they're big for him.
Yeah. Yes.
She's just got this it's a real knowing look where they're just, it says so much. It's just
yearning.
A really nice piece of performance that is just so simple. But he's basically, asking for them to release Barbara, but she's kind of saying, no, Barbara has to stay. She's got to, they need new mates for Dagon.
Yes. And she kind of like tries to beg him to stay, doesn't she? But he manages, I can't remember how, but he manages to escape again out of the house.
No, that's before.
Okay. But all that stuff, this is why I'm confused. So I thought all that stuff with the Skinner stuff happens first, and then he ends up back in the house again.
He does, but the second time he's in the house, the mermaid is basically saying, let's get married. Let's, like, we're going to organize us two being married. And he kind of submits. He kind of concedes a little bit.
Yeah.
But then that's when he kind of, he escapes. He kills the guards and the priest who was going to marry them. And basically, he's looking for Barbara. He gets a can of petrol.
Yeah, that's right. And he goes to the church, doesn't he? At that point,
to the church. Yes, yes, intends on burning it down.
Yes.
But that's where he discovers a secret passage that leads down below into the ground where the ritual chamber is. And there's a congregation, all the Innsmouthians that are all, doing their Lovecraftian culty voodoo.
It's obvious at this point that they are more like fish-like creatures at this point too, as we uncover like that they're not human. But they are. A lot of them are wearing like these human skin masks and stuff.
All these ritual masks.
Yeah, that's it. And they dance around this pit, essentially. And this is where you see where Barbara is, and she's kind of hanging over the top of it. And she has this kind of jewelry all around her, and pretty much nothing else. She's just suspended by chains. And then after a few. Yeah, go on.
The little temple of Doomy.
Yeah, I was going to say that, and I don't know what stopped me from saying it, but that's exactly what it reminded me of.
I wouldn't be surprised if that's kind of what they were aping off. It definitely has that vibe.
Yeah.
As we see, kind of the mermaid, she is there in her wheelchair.
Yes.
Which is how she gets around because she's got octopus legs. Yeah.
Which I kind of like that touch, I have to say. It makes it plausible. So we see her there, but and she actually at this point when she turns up, this is where she reveals that she is the priestess, and she's dressed in a very kind of ornate gear, and wearing the same kind of headdress that was worn by the strange man that was from the old man's story, the priest kind of character that comes along. And she starts to lead this chant to Dagon and Cthulhu. I can never say that word.
Cthulhu.
Yeah, thank you. As Barbara is then starts being lowered into the pit, and it's got this kind of murky, like really dark, black kind of oily looking water, essentially.
That we saw when Vicky was trapped in the boat. We saw this same kind of liquid come. We know that it's coming for her, and we get some more of those lovely 2001 effects.
Swirls, those CGI swirls. So this is point where Paul's still not down and out, though. He's intent to still stop this thing. So he pulls a lighter that he has from his pocket. Man, he has a lot of things in his pocket knife and a lighter. Handy guy. Must have been a Boy Scout. And then he runs out and he begins to kind of douse these kind of fish men in the petrol and light them on fire with his lighter. And they're kind of like screaming around, lots of confusion, and they're in doing so are accidentally lighting each other on fire. And the priestess is just kind of looking on in horror at this and begging Paul to stop. And while this is all happening, Barbara is still getting winched lower into this pit, and quickly kind of gets surrounded by this murky water. Paul manages to get to the winch, and he starts kind of slowly pulling her back out. And this is also where all the Innsmouthians start kind of calming down a little bit, and then they basically are ready to turn back on Paul and kill him. And this is where we get this big guy comes out with a huge limp, and he's on a crutch, and he's wearing one of these human masks, and one of his legs is a tentacle from memory.
I think we lose Barbara before that moment.
No, don't. I thought we don't. I
Really?
don't think that happened just then.
Oh, yep.
Because we get the guy coming out first, and he's the one that claims that, and he basically claims that Paul is his son. Now the character Paul is called Paul Marsh, and there is a thing in the book, in the novella, where it talks about the Marshes, and they're the ones that are the owners of the land, essentially. So that's a nice kind of, if you know the story, you kind of know that Paul Marsh is some way linked to this family. Obviously, if you don't, this becomes the reveal moment in the film.
And that he and the mermaid from his dreams are brother and sister.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. And long ago, this is when the mermaid woman basically said, or octopus lady. Anyway, she doesn't have a name, does she? In that character? Anyway, I don't think so. Anyway, she basically.
Yeah, no, I don't think they say it.
Yeah, she says, he was young and handsome for a man, and he brought women to Imboka, including your mother. You are my brother, and now you will be my lover. And at this point, Paul was still like, no, I ain't having any of that. And this is where he starts to continue to crank up the wench, but this is where he realizes it's too late, as Barbara's completely been covered in this black kind of goo-y substance, and she basically begs him to let her die, and he refuses to do so. He's like, no, I'm not going to do this. And the priestess girl basically is saying, this is how, Barbara is part of Dagon now. You need to let her go into the deep. And he, this is where then it consumes her, then, isn't it? This is the bit where it consumes her first.
The tentacles come reaching out and basically rip her from the winch, leaving her bloody stumps of hands behind.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
So she's like, Barbara's gone. And this just fuels Paul's anger, and he then douses himself in the petrol and lights himself on fire, at which point the priestess woman jumps out, knocks them both down and then into the water, and they go underwater. And this is where it gets even more surreal, because this is like a Splash Tom Hanks moment, right? Where where all of a sudden it's revealed that he has gills, and he can breathe underwater. And this is where he's all
burnt up.
But partly burnt out. Yeah, that's right. And she just kind of smiles at him like she's kind of in more mermaid form from his dream. And he realizes, that, he can't really escape it. He's one of them. And he basically then just takes her hand, and they swim into that kind of huge tunnel kind of thing that was in his dream at the beginning, under the sea. And this is where the screen then kind of fades to black, and we get this quote at the end, which I've got written down here. It says, "We shall swim out to that brooding reef in the sea." And that's mentioned, the Devil's Reef, that's mentioned in the novella. And dive down through black abysses to cyclopean and many-columned, I'm going to pronounce this, Ianthalae, and in that lair of the deep ones we shall dwell amidst wonder and glory forever. And that is how the film ends.
That's it. And that's Dagon.
Yeah, and that's Dagon. So what was your reaction when you first saw this conclude, Oscar?
I would say a little bit underwhelmed.
Yeah.
It's particularly coming really fresh off of From Beyond.
Yeah.
Which I don't think is fair for this film, because I do think that there's a lot to really like in it. It's just uneven.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that's the thing. It's not. They're very different movies in their own right. And I think, unfortunately, because there's so much happens, it's a bit of a messy movie, this.
Yes. Yes.
And so you're being bounced around a lot before it then kind of settles on in what you said quite rightly. The lore of it becomes more concrete as we realize the true horrors of the land. But it still feels messy when you come out the end of it, and even the ending feels a bit twee and a bit really? A moment. And in doing so, you're right. Underwhelming is the right thing. But then here's the thing: there's something still about it that draws me to it. You know, it's almost like the mermaid itself, and we are the Paul Marsh kind of being lured back into that world, because there is something that I kind of came out. That was my immediate reaction, my gut reaction. And I tend to kind of, Ant and I have often said about, you know, you leave things for 24 hours, give it the litmus test, kind of basically, come back 24 hours. And there's something that still sat with me that kind of made me go, despite the convoluted mess of it, there was an attraction there. And it was kind of fun in places as well. So, and places, and the admittedly dated CGI worked in places. So there's pockets of it that work. I don't work. You know,
I don't have I don't really like hold the. I don't think the CGI is terrible in this.
No, it's not.
Particularly for the time, and I don't think I think he kind of uses it quite sparingly.
Does
and there is still lots of like good practical effects. You know, the flaying of the skin and the human skins and the winching down and the remaining limbs and all of these kind of elements. I think it is. I think it's just kind of script problems. I think it's I don't really know. It would have been nice kind of seeing them in a bit more normal, seeing them go from normal, like just a bit more time with those characters, a bit more time with just kind of having a bit more of an idea of them. And I think that the main guy who is Paul, I'm not kind of crazy with him for the first half of the movie, but then when kind of things get more serious, I'm kind of way more on board with him. And I think he in those last moments where he's kind of dealing with incredibly horrific stuff, there's, you know, he's doing not a bad job.
It's interesting one, isn't it? So because, like, you know, there's a quote here from one critic saying the horror so extreme that it borders on camp, and that does, and I get that, and I agree with that. There is quite outlandish in places as we go through it, and maybe that's it. Like, you don't get enough time to really connect with any characters for it to really sit with you. And like you said, and like I was saying, the narrative is too fragmented. That even that journey that Paul takes through it, it's hard to connect with as you're going through it. And so, despite there's some good elements that are at play, so we're obviously, Gordon is a well-established director, and maybe that's its saving grace that he's able to work something out of this film and create something that at least we as an audience kind of like certain bits of it. But I mean, like, where I was left with it at the end of it was just like I'd love to see another stab at it. I'd like to see another version.
Yes,
I think it's such a rich. Yes, there's such rich material there, and I'd be keen to see it redone.
And I think it's really prime to do it because, and you know, like Lovecraft was kind of a kind of famed, not only like racist, but kind of generally a xenophobe. It was just kind of everyone he had issues with.
Yes, pretty much. Yeah.
And I think that, like, you know, you could take Shadow of Innsmouth and, you can update it. You can make it kind of relevant. With basically, you could use the town as like a metaphor for like, white extremists.
Yeah,
you could use it
definitely.
for this kind of aberration that these people kind of are devoted to.
Yeah.
Like you can really, and there is, as we've kind of talked in the past, they do have the TV series Lovecraft Country, coming out soon.
It looks like it touches on that. You're right.
Yes. It basically it's the book's phenomenal. I can't wait for the series. They basically mixes in kind of Jim Crow law, antebellum South, civil, like 50s civil rights, mixed in with the Lovecraft lore, and uses each of the chapters as an individual, is a different kind of vibe. One's a ghost story, one's a cultist kind of thing, but they each of them are used to explore specific racist kind of elements and laws and like very kind of specific systematic racism in all kinds. And I think, and they talk about it in it, where how it's a primarily black cast, and they kind of say, they talk about, like, oh, he had issues with us, but we, as a sci-fi lover, the main character still loves Lovecraft. And it's a really interesting story. I think that Innsmouth is like something you can do simply. It's something you can do simply, and it could be so drenched in atmosphere. And I think I'd love to see it have another go.
Definitely.
Because I think it comes down to, if the lead in this film was as strong as like Jeffrey Combs, then I think it was missing the charisma that it needed, that would have tied it potentially all together. And so I guess I am speaking bad about the main guy, but he picks up. It's weird. It's a weird movie. And a kind of a weird mishmash of Lovecraftian elements and camp that Re-Animator and From Beyond, had plenty of.
And it's an interesting one too, because like we're kind of bagging out the screenplay for this too, but it's the guy that did it is Dennis Powley, and he was a big collaborator with Gordon. He actually wrote the screenplay for Re-Animator and From Beyond, and even The Pit and the Pendulum, which was another Gordon movie in the early 90s with Lance Henriksen starring in it. Body Snatchers, as you mentioned, the Abel Ferrara film, but both Gordon and Powley worked on for it. So he's no stranger to it, but maybe it was just the choice that they've gone with that doesn't work, and maybe
I do know that
even it's simple.
they had plans to make this earlier. I think in the early 90s, about 10 years earlier, they had planned to do it, and it may have just been a kind of remnant, like kind of coming back to their roots.
Sure,
but it's the last film that he wrote. So I mean, I don't know whether that's because he is, did he die? No, he's still alive.
Right, yeah. Sometimes you wonder that, don't you? So interesting. If you, we often sometimes talk about, from a ratings point of view, we often look at Rotten Tomatoes as an indicator on here, and its approval rating is at 64% on Rotten Tomatoes, with about roughly 5.9 out of 10. So it's kind of basically saying it's a pretty average film. I'd maybe go along with that, but then I'm still encouraged to go back and watch it. So I don't know what that says. I think
it's like a strong 6.7.
I think it's like I said, it's I like we're saying, it'd be really cool to kind of see this redone or looked at again. And I know Elijah Wood's production company, Spectrovision, who are the guys that are basically, behind Mandy, but more recently Color Out of Space, which came out, and the success of that. But there was hinted, I read it somewhere, and I've been trying for the life of me to kind of dig out the quote again, but I definitely read it somewhere that they were talking about looking at more Lovecraftian kind of films. So maybe, who knows, maybe this one could be one of the ones. I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what he's thinking, or not just him, it's him and his partners are thinking about direction of that. But yeah, I'd like to see what comes of that. Yeah, for sure. Cool, man. Well, on that note, is there anything else you'd like to add on your take of this?
No, I think what I've needed to say on a deep level has been said.
Sure.
It's a strong 6.7.
Yeah, for sure.
It's got stuff worth it.
Does that come with a recommendation though to someone that hasn't seen this film? Would you go, watch it, or is it more like, is it the fact that Re-Animator and From Beyond are such higher canon of quality that it's a bit hard to kind of then go, now watch this?
I wouldn't recommend it without caveats. It's and I would recommend it as in like a triple billing with the other two. But also being like, okay, this is like the first two, very, very strong, very striking, very crazy. And this one, they're playing in the same sandpit, but
So does it force like, if this thing was a trilogy, which it's not, there's no canon with it, but I guess it's a trilogy of Lovecraftian films. Is it one of those cases that it falls foul of being that third installment? Where behind the same kind of makers that are trying to attempt to create that world again, but not quite hitting the nail on the head.
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head. That is what it is. That's what this feels like to me.
Yeah,
it feels like a third kind of swing of the hammer, and it just kind of misses a little bit, bends the nail just ever so slightly.
Bends it slightly. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. So we're basically saying this is a crooked nail film, essentially. Cool, man. All right. Well, I hope that doesn't end our journey of Stuart Gordon's, works on a sour note. I really hope that doesn't come across that way, because it's
been an enjoyable ride. I still enjoyed this movie.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the thing. I did enjoy it. I really did. I just think, unfortunately, we're comparing it. Apples and oranges.
It's strong, yeah. Well, and also, like, Re-Animator and Re-Animator in particular is just such a kind of a monolith in its own kind of field that it's hard to stand in that shadow.
Yeah, that's right. And even like
over instruments.
That's right. I was thinking even the Bride of Re-Animator just carry. I mean, it is a slightly different film from Re-Animator, but it carried that essence of what the original film was, and I think that I enjoyed that film. And I think if that tone was kept in this film, then we'd be having a very different conversation, I think. But there you go. That's the way it is. Okay, I think on that we'll probably wrap up. But we hope that you've enjoyed listening to us, and as we ramble on through the Lovecraftian kind of stuff, and Stuart Gordon's films. If you haven't checked out any of his films, I do recommend it. He's got some good ones in the mix there, and some of them that we haven't touched on for the podcast. Like I said, Pit and the Pendulum with Lance Henriksen is definite must. You should check that out for sure. And where Gordon has a stab at the Edgar Allan Poe classic. So, but without further ado, I should bid you good night or good day, whatever time you listen to us. But do go out and check out some of the Gordon stuff if you haven't done it before. Until then, I'm your host, Saul Muerte, and I'd like to extend my thanks once again to my colleague here, Oscar Jack.
Thank you very much. Just keep swimming.
Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming.
Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. Dagon, Dagon.
Love me, brother.
You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Music supplied by Peter Nezik. For more discussions or podcasts, head over to surgeonsofhorror.com or head over to our Facebook and Twitter sites for the latest news and updates.